We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
This is Tony Porter from A Call to Men, and you're listening to the Mankind podcast. There is a collective experience amongst men, right, that have less value in women, women as the property of men, and women as objects, particularly sexual objects. If we made that an equation, it will equal violence against women and girls. So it's really incumbent upon us as men who would not perpetrate violence against women and girls to really begin to question what is it that we've been taught that it means to be a man that contributes to the violence.
Looks like the rain has gone.
Welcome to the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove to you that there is more than just one way to be a man. I am your host, Brandon Clift, and today's episode is all about how we can become champions for women and girls. Now, as a listener of the Mankind Podcast, we know that you are the kind of man who would never perform a harmful act against women or girls. We also judge that you're likely to be the kind of man who would want to stand up against men who perpetrate these acts of violence. Yet, we also understand that developing a voice and speaking up against violence against women and girls can be scary, right? It requires a great deal of courage and oftentimes bravery. So I want you to think back to a time that you heard someone speak negatively about a woman or a girl. Or perhaps even a time where you even witnessed a woman or girl being mistreated by another boy or man. How did you react in that moment? A common example for me was when my rugby coach would often yell at my team and me, you're all playing like girls out there. Now, did I speak up to my coach knowing that we're not girls? Heck no. You think I would risk my status in junior school by speaking up? No way. And he was an adult. I respect him. Who am I as a boy to speak up against this? Now, there are also plenty of other occasions where I was, hanging with my friends in school, and I would hear my friends as they scrolled through images of girls saying, look at this slut. She's been with half the rugby team. Or comments like, look at that chick. I would tear that up. Now, I knew that was not the way anyone deserved to be spoken about. My parents raised me in a way that was not okay. So did I speak up to my friends? You bet I did. I spoke up to my friends by joining in with them and following with, yeah, dude, dressing like that, she's asking for it. Because I, as a young teen, wasn't going to risk my status and my safety in school. Now, people often chalk this up to just being young and immature. Or the most common get out of jail free card is, boys will be boys. However, what happens when boys being boys turns into men becoming violent men who, rather than simply, commenting on a woman's appearance to his buddies, will instead progress into acts of violence, harm, harassment? You see, there isn't a ceiling or a point where a young group of boys' sentiments towards women and girls is left behind in high school. Right? There's no stopping point where all of a sudden a teenager becomes a man and all of his previously held beliefs disappear or they're absolved. Now, how do we know this? Well, the stats don't lie. 1 in 3 women have experienced physical violence in an intimate relationship. 1 in 5 women have been raped. 1 in 15 children have been exposed to violence from their guardians. And these stats were collected prior to the pandemic. And unfortunately, the latest findings suggest that a dramatic spike has occurred in all of the previous data. So how do we as a society and as men address this problem? Well, we crack down on the oppressors and the perpetrators who, it has to be said, are a very tiny percentage of the male population. So we track down and capture these men, and once they're charged or thrown behind bars, we dust off our hands and call it a day. However, here's the problem. We aren't even addressing the problem. How do we know this? Because even though we condemn these acts of violence, even though we make an example of these men that are caught and that are charged, still more and more women and girls each year are being harmed and harassed. The stats aren't going backwards every time we throw someone in jail. They're still going up. You get that? So we're putting men behind bars. The stats are still rising. And I believe, and we learn in men's work, and we learn from today's guest, that this is because we as a society are only addressing the symptoms of a far greater problem. Enter Tony Porter. Now, Tony is an author, educator, activist, and the CEO of A Call to Men, an organization whose mission is to transform society by promoting healthy, respectful manhood and offering trainings for companies, governments, agencies, schools, and community groups. Now, Tony has also worked extensively with the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, Major League Soccer, and Major League Baseball. I mean, just to name a few sporting organizations. And what he's doing with these organizations is he advises on facilitating violence prevention and healthy manhood training for the athletes, the coaches, and all of the staff. Tony's TED Talk, A Call to Men, has been seen by millions, and GQ named it as one of the top 10 TED Talks every man should see. Now, I could go on with Tony's accolades and accomplishments because, honestly, I've only scratched the surface. But what is more important right now is that we are here to bring you an in-depth conversation with Tony on how we as men can learn how to stop contributing to the problem and instead become champions who fight for the safety and rights of women and girls. So if you're the kind of man who wants to play a role in protecting and empowering the women and girls in your life, then you're going to love this powerful interview with Tony Porter. Enjoy. Take a moment to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you were, and get on with it.
All right. Well, thank you, Brandon Boysen. I appreciate you inviting me to have a little time with you here. So, yes, I'm Tony Porter with A Call to Men. We're a national organization with some global impact as well. And our work is focused on engaging men in our role and responsibility in ending violence against all women and girls. We don't put an emphasis on men who are abusive. We really talk to the culture of manhood in general. We believe that if women can end the violence on their own, they would have already. And what's missing from that, if we was going to make it an equation, is us, the majority of men. The majority of men don't perpetrate violence against women and girls, but we create the fertile ground that allows it to exist. So that's where we put our emphasis. That's where we put our work. That's where we put our attention. We do that by way also of promoting healthy, respectful manhood. We believe that just by promoting healthy manhood in of itself will decrease. We increase healthy manhood, we decrease violence against women and girls. So we can actually do a bit of the work without ever even mentioning the experiences of women and girls to some degree. So that's who we are. That's what we do. We've been at it for 20 plus years and just really honored and privileged to be in the space.
Fantastic. You know, it's interesting when you talk about how it's like when we look at violence against women and girls, a lot of people naturally think to go and look at the symptoms of what's actually happening to women and girls in our society. But the approach that we're finding and that you found as well is, no, we need to understand what is setting this up, right? What's making this a possibility? What's making this the reality? But, you know, ever since I, got into men's work and started learning more about some of these statistics, I started to separate myself from the statistics and go, well, I wouldn't consider Boysen and I anything but just well-meaning good guys. We're not the kinds of men who would ever put their hands on a woman or commit acts of aggression against women or girls. But so on the surface, I think, well, we're not the problem. Yeah. Yet, so how do we play into that? How does that involve us in anything way? And I'm curious of how the man box plays into that.
Yeah, and that's a big part of our experience and what we attempt to address in the work. First, I want to say, when you made mention of the violence being the symptom, I mean, that's really important to acknowledge. And we live in a society that's rooted in counting and measuring. And you can really, the violence is rooted in the symptoms. Also, we can react to that, right? We know how to react to something that's happened already. We can build science and logic around that. It's a lot more challenging to prevent. And we're not a society that's so much rooted in preventing. We're much more, we much easier embrace reacting. And that's why prevention work at times can be so difficult, because you can't count it and measure it the same. And so you can't quantify it the same. And so it gets less attention. But we've been really happy to see researchers, at least today, maybe not 20 years ago, but researchers today are really, really finding a way to get around this with us. And we need their support in a society like ours that's so invested in research and not just the stories and the experiences of people. I want to touch on that because you brought it to light, and it's important. You know, to your point, Brandon, the whole good guy, bad guy thing. One of the things that are called the men is you'll rarely hear us say good guys or bad guys. You don't hear us mention, I mean, I'm not saying never, but it's something we try to intentionally not to speak about good guys and bad guys. We try not to create this huge division between men.
A binary.
Not, you know, the binary, yes. And at the same time, we're not letting men like yourself, Boysen, and me, we're not letting us off the hook.
That's it.
We don't get to hang out in the good guy group over here, and then there's the bad guys over there. The truth of the matter is, men who perpetrate violence against women and girls are a minority of men in comparison to the rest of us. There's a lot of men. It's an epidemic of violence. It's a tremendous amount of violence. You know, it's one of the leading causes of injury to women in our nation. So it's at epidemic proportions, right? So it's a lot of men, but it's a smaller amount of men in comparison to the rest of us. And so it's fair for us, you know, collectively as men, as male identified folks, to really grapple with how is this happening on our watch, right? Just basic math, right? You know, this many of them, a whole lot more of us, we should be able to stop that from happening.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is, you know, I was going to say something, but I'll lose some people if I say it too early. The truth, because it's you know, it's challenging. The truth of the matter is, steep in the socialization of what it means to be a man. You talked about the man box as a term we use it to call the men. The man box also can be called the collective socialization of manhood.
Yes.
Deep in the collective socialization of manhood, what it means to be a man. There are three things that we pay close attention to at A Call to Men. How we're socialized to have less value in women, how we're socialized to view women as the property of men, and how we're socialized to view women as objects, particularly sexual objects. Now, we're not saying in this man box, this collective socialization of manhood, that all men do all the same stuff. We're not saying that, but violence, right?
Beautiful.
We're expanding our definition of violence. So it's really incumbent upon us as men who would not perpetrate violence against women and girls to really begin to question what is it that we've been taught that it means to be a man that contributes to the violence, right?
That's the phrasing. That's the phrasing. That's something Boysen helped me kind of articulate before we went live was, you know, I'm not the problem, right? I'm not someone who would consider myself someone to ever lay their hands on a woman, but how do I perpetuate?
Mm-hmm.
Which is also what we get taught, right? That's true. That's a part of the collective socialization is that we teach boys to disidentify with the bad guys in quotes, right? So, no, not me, but yo, bro, nudge, nudge. I'm also going to keep your secret for you when you start going off the rails, right? Or I'm going to overlook the ways that I am perpetuating ownership of women, the degradation of women, and this kind of collective reinforcement of not girl.
Right.
Man equals not girl, and all of those kind of things. Yeah. So talk about, it's a courage thing, right?
Yeah. Well, it takes courage for men to step aside and if we want to be leaders, to really lead in this direction. But, you know, when we talk about violence against women and girls, we talk about the oppression of women. We're talking about sexism, right?
Yes.
When we talk about the oppression of women, we're talking about male domination. Some folks would say male privilege when we're talking about the oppression of women. And there's several forms of group oppression here in the United States that are overwhelming. As we mentioned, in sexism, could be racism, classism, right? Heterosexism, ageism,
Yes.
ableism, right? These are many of the forms of group oppression. And I want you to think about every one of those forms of group oppression requires violence to be a part of its maintenance, right? Racism requires violence against Black and brown people to be part of its maintenance. Classism requires violence against financially poor people. Heterosexism requires violence against lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, gender non-conforming folks to be part of its maintenance, right? Violence against folks with various forms of disability, right? So it makes sense that to maintain oppression of women, violence is required. So while we, as men who would not harm women, don't perpetrate the violence is being done on our behalf because we still maintain a male-dominating society, right? We still maintain, you know, when we talk about issues of equity and equality, we're not sharing, right, with women. White women make still 80 cents to $1 for men with the same exact job. Women of color is about 65 cents to $1 for the same job, right? When you think about that, when you look at the three branches of government and you look at corporate boardrooms, the places that the major decisions that are made that impact on the lives of the masses in this country, you still find male domination, and in many cases, white male domination, right? When you look at through the ranks of these entities that impact on all of our lives in a collective way, you continue to see domination, male domination. To maintain domination, any form of group oppression, violence is required. So we really have to grapple with that as men who are really not about violence, but how are we benefiting from it? Is a fair question.
How are we benefiting from it?
Yes. And I want to dive into that even further to break it down with the violence thing, because I'm going to recall what you said just a little while ago, this understanding of violence on a broadening spectrum within our culture, right? So I may not be a physically violent man, but I may be perpetrating microaggressions left and right that are going to impact the people around me, that are going to impact the women in my life, the Black folks in my life, the LGBTQ people in my life, by my silence, by my patronizing, by my overlooking, by, not making the equity choice when it comes to, hire, fire, promotion, movement, all of those things, right? Yeah.
You're on it. That's right.
Yeah. So I'm curious because instantly my mind goes to me being the fixer that I am. I want to dial it back again to kind of go back to this, like the collective socialization of men, the man box, right? That you guys have coined. So are you able to share a story that could help us better understand the concept of the man box, how it relates to unhealthy manhood and violence against women?
Story, I'll give you a good example. We spend a lot of time in athletics. We spend a lot of time in the world of athletics. Athletes, coaches are men that men look up to. Matter of fact, you go to the places where you find male domination at its height, what we would sometimes call quote unquote alpha males. Right. You go to those places where male domination is at its height, you would also find that those would tend to be the places or the entities that we respect most as men. We love sports.
Yep.
Not every one of us, but far too many of us, yeah, we love sports. And so we spend a lot of time with athletics. We know it's not going anywhere. We spend a lot of time in entertainment industry. We spend a lot of time with men that men look up to and really help them to what we call develop a voice. Because we are the first generation of men really being asked to speak out about this in any really kind of intentional way. And so for many men, we call it developing a voice. They never really had a responsibility to speak to this. So we spend a lot of time with men who have influence over other men and employ them and help them to make this part of their platforms. We call it your influence, your platform. And so coaches, for example, you know, the easiest way for a coach, and I've coached a lot of sports over the years, and the easiest way to coach boys, to tell a boy he's not playing up to par, is to tell him he's playing like who? Like a girl. And we don't even say girl anymore because girl is too soft. So you got to come harder.
Yeah. Playing
like
that's
where you know, young people, I'll say this generation or so, has switched the language up a little bit with men to hard and soft.
Yeah.
Right, hard and soft. So you got to be hard. Hard meaning you got to be a little more toxic, and you got to, you know, a little more dominating. Hard. And then soft is the opposite, and soft is what you don't want to be. Soft is what we would call weak.
Yeah.
Right. And so just to say you're playing like a girl actually is too soft, right? You got to come harder. And harder actually then means to use language that's more denigrating and dehumanizing the women at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But the bigger part of the point is coaches for generations have the easiest way to coach a boy in sports to motivate him is to tell him he's playing like a girl. Because in our society, we've been taught as men to have higher expectations of ourselves, and as I mentioned earlier, less and lower value in respect to women. So if a boy is playing like a girl, he is now in this place that he doesn't want to be. We're also taught as men to define what it means to be a man by distancing ourselves from what we perceive to be the experience of girls, right? We're talking about boys and girls here, coaches, the adult. So what we're telling the boy when we tell him he's playing like a girl, we're telling him he's not distancing himself. This man box, by the way, is also extremely homophobic.
Yeah.
Right? We say homophobia, heterosexism is the glue that keeps the man box together.
Beautiful.
Right?
Yes.
So when you're telling this boy he's playing like a girl, now in many respects, coaches don't even mean any harm. Because as men, we also have this way of doing tradition. See, we're kind of just on remote control, doing what we've always done without question.
Yeah.
So when I was coached as a boy, coaches told me to stop playing like a girl. So, and it worked. You know, I tried harder. I did better. So when I'm coaching, I'm going to tell boys to stop playing like a girl. We're kind of just on remote control. That's part of our work, Brandon, is to get men off of remote control, to get us to think a little more critically and stop just doing tradition.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we began to do with coaches is ask the question, hey, coach, I know why you're telling the boy to stop playing like a girl, because you're trying to motivate him to play harder. In essence, though, what you're doing is telling him you're supposed to be up here, you're down here, get yourself together and get back up here where you belong. So check this out, coach. I got a question for you. Every time you tell a boy to stop playing like a girl, coach, what are you saying about girls? That's stop a man in his tracks, right? Because in his mind, when he tells, because we're on remote control, remember, we're just doing tradition. In his mind, when he tells a boy to stop playing like a girl, he ain't even thinking about girls. He just knows that works. He's not even thinking about girls. So when I say to him, hey, coach, every time you tell a boy to stop playing like a girl, what are you saying about girls? He's like, what? Girls? What are you talking? Well, you said it, coach. And he's saying to me, well, girls, what are you talking about? Ain't nobody talking about girls. Because in his mind, he's not even connected around that. But then when you get him to stop and think, you know, and then get in the conversation, well, what am I saying about girls? I guess I'm saying they're less valued. They have no purpose. They're useless. You don't want to be there. You don't. Yeah, that's what you're saying, coach, right? And we have to really, really think about this here. And what is the message that our boys are getting beyond sports about girls? There's some misogyny going on in here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff happening all at once that's ripping into the psyche of our boys and stays there far too often throughout their entire lives, right? So it's one of the things that we try to do this work in a way with men that's an invitation, right? We call it inviting men, not indicting men, right? We believe you can have a loving and accountable experience at the same time. Most folks are challenged by that. You can't work with us at a call to men and do this thing, you know, in this real academic kind of learning way. You got to be open to being vulnerable, to being transparent, to being connected with men. We don't stay behind podiums. We're moving around an audience of men and connecting with men, because it has to be an accountable experience, but a loving experience also. But the point is, there are ways to connect with men that create quick aha moments and get them on board, because you don't know how much time you're going to have with men. You know, one of our mottos is, whatever time I got with a man, my job is to reach in, grab his heart, and ensure he leaves my presence thinking and operating differently than he did when he entered, with the knowledge that is a long distance at times between the head and the heart. But we know the heart is where the change is. So when you connect with men these ways, we have these little quick ways to connect with men, but coaches are instrumental to expediting the change we want to see, right? They're instrumental. So we spend a lot of time, regardless of how we feel about athletics, that's the place we got to go, because men live and breathe sports.
Just two things that, thank you. That was beautiful. Couple of things that popped for me as you were talking about that don't question it thing, right? They're not even the coach is not even thinking about girls. And that's part of, again, this socialization. Don't question it. Just learn it, repeat it, learn it, repeat it, learn it, repeat it. And that creating that cognitive dissonance with him, right? So what are you saying about girls when you say that? Cracks that code, cracks the man code, so that it opens a space for us to then invite. And then the other thing that I think that you do, that Call to Men does beautifully, and I just want to draw this out a little bit more, is, and man, I get it. You're not bad.
Yes.
You were just taught this.
Right.
That's the bridge, in my judgment, that's missing, because we can try and debate and have this discussion on an intellectual, level all day. But as you say, the real work is done in the heart. And that's why I find it so disheartening to see majority of these issues being addressed on this level, on TV, on social media, discussion boards. I love just the way you're putting it, is, who's willing to experience it, who's willing to actually be in the room, to be able to accept the accountability of the environment and be able to be open, possibly learning some things about how you were raised.
Right.
That may not be that nice.
You got to be willing to meet men where they're at, first of all.
Yeah.
You got to be, when we talk about stage setting, no big eyes, no little U's, right? It's about us just getting together and having a conversation as men and meeting men where they're at, not having this expectation that they have to have this level of social consciousness, as younger folks say today, being woke, right? that they have to have this level of social consciousness in order to engage with you, right? No, you got to be willing to meet men where they're at. And if you also accept the fact that you have a whole bunch of inconsistencies around this as well, you're on your own journey. You ain't graduated. There's no certificate of completion. If you're humble enough to realize that within yourself, then it makes it a lot easier to meet other men where they're at, because the truth of the matter is, you're one of them. You're one of them yourself. You just got some information and you're putting time and distance in between, you know, acting out kind of behavior. You're trying to be better as a man, but come on, right? Let's be real. You know, sometimes when I look at myself, if I want to say someone was worse off, it's, you know, than someone else, it would be me. Because, you know, I know when I'm in the man box that I got enough consciousness and I'm not on remote control. So the truth of the matter is, when I'm choosing to be in the man box instead of out of it, I'm making a conscious decision, right? I'm talking to myself and saying, Tony, you know, you're in the box. And I'm saying, yeah, man, but look, I'm scared right now. I don't want to be, I'm making a conscious decision. Yeah. So who's worse if someone is such, you know, the man who's making the conscious decision or the man who's just on remote control, just doing what he's always been taught? So we need to be real about this here. And I think when I can be real like that, I can meet men where they're at and help them get on a journey toward healthy manhood. But I can't expect them to, you know, be at a place of comfort for me to engage with them. I have these conversations with men all the time, choosing who they will engage with and who they won't. And a lot of that's our own fear. A lot of that's what we've been taught growing up, you know, which men to engage with, which men not, communities to be a part of, which communities to not, you know. And if I'm not willing to, if I'm only willing to work in community A and I'm not willing to work in community B, and both are in the area that I have a responsibility to serve, then I need to also be honest and say I'm not about ending violence against women in community B, right? Because I'm not willing to engage the men there. There's a level of honesty that I need to have about that.
Oof. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have a follow-up question for you. We did an episode of our web show during the Black Lives Matter movement. Sorry, and so we had you know, men of color come on, and we had a discussion around just kind of like understanding what led to you know, this movement, what led to the outcry, and what we came away with. No one came into the conversation with answers already, but it was interesting how the conversation ended with, it takes a willingness. It takes a willingness to not say, hey, you know, here's my house with my white picket fence, my gate's open, come over anytime. It's like, no, am I willing to step outside of my yard and go to another neighborhood and see how people live differently from the way I do, or see things differently from the way I do, experience life differently than the way I do? Do you believe that how we're talking and addressing man box right now is also a great model in which we can address other issues that we're facing as a culture?
It's that intersectionality piece that you brought in the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's not only a way, it's required. We have to, right? We can't address manhood in this monocultural way. And if we do, and if we're choosing to do that in the United States of America, based on how our country is constructed, if you're doing that, anything neutral in this country is going to best benefit those who identify as white, right? So we got to be intentional in conversations to really then be speaking about the masses, right? So if we just have a generic, what we might call mainstream type conversation, is going to best benefit mainstream culture, right? To your point, Brandon, about opening the fence, you know, that and stepping in and embracing discomfort, right? White supremacy culture, one of the characteristics is a right to comfort, right? So why would I be stepping into discomfort when what my cultural norms are is a right to comfort?
Yeah.
Right? If we're going to get deeper in, Boysen was mentioning intersectionality, a term coined by our sister Kimberly Crenshaw.
Yes,
if we're going to step into that space, right, we have to understand the experience of other groups of men and how, because we're all violent, but there are other things going on with us, right? So we could talk about trauma, for example. Right? We know hurt people hurt people. Hurt people hurt other people. We also know that the more experience you're having of marginalization, financially poor, person of color, right, maybe a disability, the more aspects of there's more oppression that you're experiencing, the more trauma you're experiencing. The more trauma you're experiencing, the more likely you may hurt someone else as well.
Right.
So there are other characteristics, maybe I want to say it that way, I'm not sure. There are other things going on that also have to be addressed. You know, when we concentrate poverty, we breed crime by concentrating poverty, right? When you ensure that all financially poor people deal with that oppression by themselves and must live only amongst themselves, you are breeding, right? And when you police them, right? There's one thing about law enforcement protecting and serving, maybe where we live, and then when you concentrate poverty, right? That becomes policing. Back to my example of oppression requires violence. So there's a difference between, talk about Black Lives Matter, a movement, there's a difference between protecting and serving and policing.
Beautiful.
Right? Policing, there's a different experience. And so when you look at the experiences folks have in relationship to group oppression, you're going to see that spill over into violence. Now, when I first started doing this work, about a generation ago, this work was clearly taught by white feminist perspectives and views. I'm not taking all of that and throwing it out because there's some stuff there that's good. But what we found over the years is a lot of it doesn't work for every community, right? One of my mentors, Gwen Wright, said to me many years ago, she said, Tony, one of the basic differences between Black feminism and white feminism is white women want law enforcement to do more, and we're concerned they're going to do too much. And that's going to always be a clear difference between us. I'm talking about feminist perspectives because feminist perspectives and theories and practices has really guided our work, as we was talking about earlier, as it relates to intervention, and is very, very much a part of our work as it relates to prevention. All right. But which feminist perspectives and views are we listening to?
Good.
When we say leadership from women, which women, right? Which women? Is there a collective of women? Have women come together and created this intersectional approach? There's a lot of still work going on in those spaces, right? So we haven't arrived yet there. So it's really important. Back in the day, we would say a man once abusive, always abusive. You're done. We're done with you forever. You know, back in the day, it was really, really important to have a real clear criminal justice approach, you know, not a community approach. Back in the day, there was really no conversation around healing, right? It was just around accountability, right? It wasn't about healing. It was about it wasn't about community healing either, and the impact on community. Because if you think about white feminist perspective, white folks white folks are not taught that they're part of a group. They're taught that they're an individual. So much of what this country is founded on individualism. And so they don't think community. They think individual. Black and brown folks are part of a group first and an individual second. So we think from a community perspective. You really hear us say the white community. You hear Black community, brown community. And sometimes folks think that's geographical, but it's not always, right? but you're taught to be part of a group. So there's a community healing that's needed in many cases. And so we've done a lot of work over the years to bring the intersection in of oppression and understanding intersectionality so we can get better at ending violence. I said this in the beginning of our time. I said ending violence against all women, right? Because the way we say it is just ending violence against women. I live in North Carolina. I don't think we think about the Hmong women in Hickory, North Carolina, until we say all, right? We don't think about the Lumbee tribe over in Lumberton, North Carolina on the East Coast side there, until we say all right? So understanding our country, its norms, its history, the intersection, the group of prayer, we got to bring that into the work of engaging men. We can't do this in a monocultural way, or then we would then really just be working on behalf of ending violence against white women. And I know that's not what we want
to do. Woo! Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to just repeat your words. Anything identified as neutral is going to best benefit white culture, the dominant culture. Thank you. I just wanted to repeat that.
I mean, I'm invested in them.
Yeah.
I want everybody to be safe. I want white women to be safe. You know, I want us all to be better. But we got to do it in a way that, well, we're all better.
And we're willing to pull back the curtains to see what maybe we're taught not to look at. I was taught not to see a lot out there in the culture. Thank you very much for that. May I move on to a question? So here we are in COVID times, quarantine times. What do you see out there that on one side you're feeling really hopeful about in the movement where it's happening in the anti-violence movement in these areas, in these intersections? And what do you see that is really challenging right now?
Well, I don't know how much. I'm trying to think of what you asked me, Boysen, and how it applies to COVID. I know the pandemic has been very challenging in respect to, particularly in the stress of it all, right? Financial stress for so many families, stress with children. And then you couple that with isolation, which is, you know, domestic violence, a form of one of the violences we address, you know, breeds off of isolation. So we know the numbers have increased over this pandemic as it relates to that. We also know with this pandemic, speaking of the stress again, that men in our own mental health, you know, you know, steep in the socialization, what it means to be a man, men are taught that asking for help is viewed as a sign of weakness.
Yes.
And remember, I mentioned earlier that we distance ourselves from weakness. We don't talk about weakness. You know, in teaching what it means to be a man, a boy is taught to distance himself from the experience of girls. And we're taught women and girls are weak and men and boys are tough and strong and all the rest of that. And so we're taught never really to identify with weakness. We don't even use the word weak in association with ourselves. Even when we know we're feeling weak, we'll say, I'm feeling a little tired. I'm not feeling myself today. You know, we'll say everything other than I'm feeling weak. The word weak is not in our vocabulary. And so then a product of that, if asking for help is viewed as being weakness, you can see that, just mathematically speaking, you can see men don't ask for help, men don't offer help, and men don't accept help. And so if you look at these challenging times that we're in, very, very stressful times, you can see the impact on men when we struggle with asking, accepting, and offering help. Beautiful. Right? This pandemic is exposing that, right? It's truly, truly exposing that. The male socialization, brothers, that we're talking about here is not only supporting, contributing, maintaining, creating an epidemic of violence against women and girls, it's also killing us too, right? It's killing us, right? It's killing us too.
Right. Yeah.
So this pandemic is exposing the violence, is exposing the mental health challenges. You know, when men are taught that the only emotion that we give each other permission to express is anger, right? And then we stifle it there. We don't even know that anger is actually fear or pain, because anger is a secondary emotion. Yeah. But we stifle our feelings right there. We grow up from boys to be men that have very limited emotional intelligence.
Yes.
It only makes sense because we never really given ourselves permission to explore who we are emotionally speaking. So you take that limited emotional intelligence, you take this inability to ask, accept, or offer help, you couple that with the stress of this pandemic, and you can see what it's exposing for us as men. And again, I said also the violence that women are experiencing is also contributing that. And then we all, and I really appreciate that we're at a time also, we're all also seeing and getting a better understanding of how a race construct is playing out in this space right now. 2020 and then, you know, moving into 2021, but 2020 in itself, you couple the pandemic with the racial unrest, and it's a time of reckoning for us as Americans.
Thank you. And with all of that, and you just brought the word pain in, and I just wanted to say something that I see that's hopeful, and I'm going to invite to, if you have anything else that you see that's hopeful. I see male pain. I see pain being normalized more in our socialization. I see more men out there actually able to say, I'm in pain. Maybe that's physical pain, but normalizing emotional pain with each other and being able to out it. Like you said, men were taught not to ask for help. We're taught to deny our physical pain. We're taught to deny emotional pain. I think that there's some glimmers in there with Call to Men, with the many other organizations that are out there engaging with men, of men actually saying, holy shit, I'm recognizing that I'm hurting, and that my hurting is hurting other people in the world. Yeah. What else do you see as hopeful signs right now?
I see we've created more spaces to have these conversations. The pandemic has really moved us to a virtual platform that we've kind of avoided to a certain degree. And these virtual platforms, be it podcasts like yours or other type of platforms, has really created an abundance of places for us to connect, learn, talk, be together. I see that happening. I'm hopeful around that. I'm hopeful in the time that we're spending with boys. We're spending much more intentional time with boys than ever before. One of the keys, we believe, to not only promoting healthy manhood, but also ending violence against women and girls, is teaching boys to be their authentic selves, right? That authenticity is okay. And so we're creating numerous spaces and places for boys to be their authentic selves. I see that happening. I want to, like when I just heard you, Boysen, when you shared, you know, about what you were seeing, I thought about you, I thought about the three of us. In many cases, we find ourselves in like-minded spaces, right? So sometimes I question, well, how much am I really seeing versus what's really going on? But I also spent a lot of time reading and listening to folks that might not be in our spaces, and you're starting to hear conversations very similar to ours. They might not use the same jargon. They might come at it in ways that we might not, or maybe that we even should, though, actually, because they're real. But I am beginning to see what I've always hoped to see. We haven't arrived, but I don't feel like I'm just caught up in despair, right? I am hopeful.
Thank you.
Which is a perfect place, I believe, to talk about your book. book.
Yes.
I'm excited to hear about this, because I know
Yes.
we talk a lot about men and what we're seeing, how men are behaving in today's world, but sometimes it's easy to forget that all men were once impressionable little boys.
Right.
That were
Right.
just trying to figure things out.
So, with boys, when we grew up as boys, part of displaying your manhood was how you responded to when you were dared to do something, right? I dare you to do this. I dare you to do that, right?
Oh, yeah.
And if my mother knew some of the things I did, messing around with them dares, she only knew. It's crazy as boys. We create life and death situations messing around.
Yes, we did.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, when you allow yourself to think about it, it's really all about claiming your manhood, is what it really, really amounts to, So we took that language and we created this book. Is this looking upside down? Or?
No,
No,
we got you.
you
We
got
had
it.
you right.
Yeah, okay. This book, a book of dares. So two of our staff persons actually authored it along with support from the team in general. Anna Marie Johnson Teague and Ted Bunch. Book of Dare. So it's 100 ways for boys to be kind, bold, and brave. So is just every page, and we did this with boys, right? They're the ones that actually came up with all the dares, and it's really, really cool. Dare to watch a movie about a girl or a woman. Dare to support a girl in sports. I love that because my daughter's a softball player throughout school, and so her brother would come over to watch her games. They had the same school, after school, and sometimes he would have a couple of his buddies. He would have to drag them along, and the girls' softball team had 6, 7 state championships. The boys' baseball team wasn't winning nothing. Can't make the playoffs. Girls got banners all around their outfield. But we'd rather go watch. This is that whole less value thing, right?
That's
We'd
right.
rather go watch the boys' baseball team than to watch the girls' softball team, who are tearing it up, by the way. They're playing great. So this is a book of dares, and it's just a wonderful book that we love, that we think is great, is a great tool. Dare to do something kind just because, right? Dare to use your pronouns when you're introducing yourself. Dare to try a new haircut. Dare to wash and dry the dishes for a week. Just, it's a pretty cool book. Parents are loving it. Makes me think about not only my childhood, but just raising my sons, just really. So it's a cool project, creating great conversations and whatnot. So thank you for asking about it.
Wow. So you're telling me I never had to jump off the 60-foot quarry as a 12-year-old to show my manhood, because I feel that today.
Oh, man. I grew up in the inner city, so we had what they call fire escapes.
Yeah.
You had in the back or the front of the building. We'd have been much better if it was in the front of the building, because then the adults could see what we were doing. But our fire escapes was in the back of the building. Talk about we jump off the fire escape onto a mattress.
Yeah.
From the first floor. Who's willing to go up to the second floor?
Oh, man.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah. So.
But all, in the quest to define manhood, to distance ourselves from the experience of what we perceive to be the experience of girls, right? I believe as men, women happen to be a lot closer to humanity than men. With all the oppression they experience from us, I just think they represent humanity better than men. And the truth of the matter is, when we're distancing ourselves from the experience of women and girls to define what it means to be the man, in many cases, I believe we're distancing ourselves from our own humanity.
Wow.
We got work to do as men. We can learn a lot from women, though, in the process.
Thank you.
Well, that's a perfect spot to kind of tie things up. Tony, mate, thank you so much for taking the time to be with Boysen and I today and to share your insights from your time in the arena on these very important topics. I want to know more ways in which I can support, our community can support A Call to Men and this book as well. So tell us how we can find out more.
Yeah, look, so we're on all forms of social media, right? But if you go visit our website, the book is there, other products are there, different training events that we host. And particularly now, you was talking about that earlier, Boysen, that we're in this virtual world. We're doing training institutes. We do community conversations. We've immersed ourselves in this space of using these platforms to provide education and training. And that's a big part of what we do. So please visit our website, acalltomen.org, or visit us on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, right? And learn more about us. And please reach out to us. We love to have you join us and being part of the solution, to creating a world where all boys are loving and respectful and all girls are valued and safe.
Perfect. Beautiful.
Perfectly said. Thank you.
Awesome.
Look for acalltomen.org in the show notes and down below in the video. And Tony Porter, it's been an honor, and I'm so glad that we're connected in this way.
Yeah, same here. I appreciate you inviting us. That was very nice of you.
Yeah, I'll say until next time.
Yes, sir.
There you go.
What a powerful interview with Tony there. I'm sitting here just kind of letting all of it sink in and understand that although I don't judge myself to be the kind of person that would ever harm, like physically, mentally, emotionally harm a woman or a girl or anyone for that matter, that there are ways that I could still be perpetuating the problems, right? I could still be playing a role without even knowing it of the challenges that women and girls face in the workplace, in their schooling lives, like just in their relationships as well. I'm also sitting with the idea that although I might see someone act in a horrible way, I might want to indict that person and challenge them and tell them all the ways that they're wrong, but there may actually be a better way to do that by inviting them to see their acts, to see the way they're behaving, to see the impact of their actions, instead of just indicting them and blaming them or naming them as the bad guy. Which is interesting because, I want to make them the bad guy. I want to see myself as the good guy, yet all of us, all parties involved, could still be playing a role in the problem. So I hope you guys got a lot out of today's episode. I strongly recommend that you follow A Call to Men and Tony Porter's work. To find out more about A Call to Men, check out acalltomen.org, as well as be sure to check out Tony's TED Talk, A Call to Men, on TED.com or on YouTube. And check out his book, A Book of Dares. If you have young boys in your life, whether they're your own, whether you're the coach of a sporting team or educator, or they're your nephews, if you have young people in your life, especially young boys, check out A Book of Dares. I'm sure it's a great learning tool for them so that we all can contribute to becoming champions for women and girls in our lives. And links to everything you just heard are in the show notes. This has been the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. I have been your host, Brandon Clift, and I personally want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. And of course, I want to thank you, the listener, because through your attention and your support, you make it a heck of a lot easier for us to let men out there in the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. Special thanks, of course, goes to my incredible team, Marketing and Communications Director Boysen Hodgsen, producer and editor of this episode, Michael Russo, who makes me sound so much more intelligent than I actually am, so of course, special kudos goes there. And if you've been enjoying the music throughout this episode and all of our episodes, check out Jim, Donovan, and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. Now, the fee for this episode is simple. If you found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, remember that life doesn't happen to us, it happens for us, so long as we rip the pen out of fate's hand and become the author of our own story. So my friend, pick up the pen and we'll see you next week. Lots of love.